Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. People are now joining from the waiting room. Hope you're fine. Like in any webinar, we're going to wait a couple of minutes as people are clicking in. Hi, welcome. We're about to start. Waiting for people to join us. We'll also try to find my colleague Tatiana, who is going to help me moderating the meeting today. Tatiana, I'm promoting you to a discussion partner. You don't have to turn on your mic and camera, but only so you can have access to everything I can do. Hi, everyone. You're not late. We haven't started yet. We're waiting for people to click in, and we're going to kick off in 1-2 minutes. Hello also to Marc, who has already joined us, and thank you for being here. I'm going to say all this once again in some seconds. I think I'm going to thank you 2-3 times until we start. I think the first wave of participants is already here. We're 40 people altogether. About 80 have registered to this webinar, so I'm going to give it another minute. And then we're going to kick off, and whoever is late is going to miss some wisdom. It's okay. They're going to catch up in a different way. So, okay. So I think we can start. Oh, Marc, if you look at the chat, can I ask you a technical question before we kick off? Do you have the possibility of writing to everyone or only to hosts?
Host and panelists, I can write.
Oh, okay. Okay. Let me solve this, hopefully.
But you can change it if you click on hosts. You can,
Yes,
if you click on the thing.
Yeah, it's not about me, it's about my colleague Tatiana. I have to make her a co-host of the meeting. Tati, hopefully now you're able to write to everyone. Give me a go so I can start. Super. Thank you very much. So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us in today's webinar titled The Acceleration of Europe's Militarization and the ReARM Europe Plan with member of the European Parliament, Marc Botenga. Thank you, Marc, again for being here. Marc is representing the Workers' Party of Belgium, PVDA, in the European Parliament. And he's also, of course, a member of the left group in the Parliament. I will introduce Marc a little bit more in detail in the next minutes. First, I will introduce myself. I will be the moderator of today's discussion. My name is Katerina Anastasiou. I am the facilitator for Transform Europe. I facilitate projects related to migration, the global strategy program, and peace. And as I said before, I will be moderating the discussion today. This webinar today is the first of a series we're planning to have in the coming months. It will be a discussion that will follow and focus on this acceleration of the European Union's militarization, and as well as its impacts on EU economy, national and supranational, our societies, and the conceptualization of peace as the only viable and possible vision of the future for us coming from the left. In this first session, we will discuss the Stop ReARM Europe plan. The first thing I want to say is that we're perfectly aware that the plan has been renamed to Readiness 2030. We do understand that this is a cosmetic change that doesn't change the core of the policy promised by it. So we will keep referring to it as the ReARM Europe plan, also through the course of the webinar series. Now I have the honor to introduce our speaker, Marc Botenga. Marc has been an MEP since 2019, but even before that, worked in the European Parliament for the group in an advisory role. He has studied law, and he's currently representing the group in a number of committees, among some the Committee on Foreign Affairs, the Committee on Security and Defense. He's inside the delegation to the Africa and EU Parliamentary Assembly. He's a substitute in the ECON, in the Committee on Economic and Monetary Affairs, and he's a substitute also to the Delegation for Relations with Palestine. Marc, thank you for making the time to be with us today. Along reading your bio, it's really incredible to imagine that you find time to be with us. So thank you again. Political beings as we are, I would like to start our discussion with giving you the floor and asking you straight on the big question. Why? Why now? Why is this the moment the EU leadership, I will call it now, decides to increase military spending to up to 800 billion? Where does the money come from, and how will it affect Europeans? And is it really expenditure that will secure our lives in the continent? What do you think?
Good evening, afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the organization of this discussion. I think it's useful. Now those are already three questions, so I hope I'll start to answer them, and then you'll tell me what I missed. And now the official reason, obviously, or the invoked reason, is the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And or the Russian military buildup, let's say a little bit the Russian threat to Europe. This is mostly what is invoked as a reason to justify what they call the rearmament of Europe. Now, let me add immediately the critical note that I don't believe that's the real reason. That is what is being invoked. But if you look at, and if people from Germany, for example, are following us, the discussion on rearmament or more investment in defense and so on predates 2022 largely. So it's not something that just came up, and of course then the war in Ukraine gave this how would I say, gave an extra dimension or impetus to it. Sorry. What is really behind it? I think there's different things. One of the real one of the main points and is obviously the fact that the world is changing very rapidly, and that China is rising, and the United States play a very important role. Other countries are rising or playing more important role. But more importantly, the European Union is actually losing weight. The European Union is on the global stage actually losing influence and losing relevance, even to be very honest. And so there's this theory that we could, in one way or another, compensate for that through military power. It's like we pay, we give money to countries. That's a bit the main narrative. But no one is listening to us, and that is because we're not a military power. So if only we were a military power, then other countries would take us more seriously. And that is a rhetoric that's been developed for a long time, really, much predating, once again, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So there's this idea, and it's true. I mean, objectively, there's part of it is true. It is true that the European Union has lost out diplomatically. If you look at current crises ongoing in the world and the diplomatic negotiations around this, European Union is absent. Take the Iranian nuclear program 10, 15 years ago. European countries, Germany, France, Great Britain, played a core part in these negotiations. Today, they're absent. Look at Palestine. 15 years ago or more, for decades, basically, the European Union played a very important diplomatic role in negotiations and so on. Today, they're absent. They've not been around the table of one single discussion on Gaza. It's been the United States, been Jordan, Qatar, Egypt, and so on, but not Saudi Arabia, but not the Europeans. Even in Congo, Rwanda, where historically some European countries play a role. Today, the discussions between Rwanda and Congo, they were done by the Qataris at the behest of the United States, apparently. So you have this decline, diplomatic decline, and so one of the reactions to this is militarization, or saying, we have a stronger military, so people will listen to us. Will this guarantee security? I don't think so, because the objective, to me, and we can debate this, is something different. But even if you would say that the objective would be to guarantee security, I think there's a few questions you need to answer first. Why, we now spend 2 to 3 times, I think 3 times more as Europeans than Russia does. We spend more than India, than Brazil, than South Africa. So how come we would be unable, with the current amount of money, to guarantee our security, to guarantee or even our defense needs? That seems like a fair question, and that's not even. I don't think that's a very political question. It's the question any accountant would ask. And then you can say, yeah, but Russian bullets cost less. But then the counter argument is, yeah, but Europe has better technology. And this would be a first question to ask. And a second question would be, okay, so how much would be enough then? Do we need to spend 4 times, 5 times more? What are the priorities? What's your vision? So this is one, let's say, one cluster I'd address. And the second cluster, and I'll stop on that, is that obviously security is not guaranteed through military power in the first place, because obviously you get the security dilemma where you have, you think you get safer by buying more weapons or by producing more weapons, but then there's a counter reaction. The other side, the neighbor or another superpower, is going to say, oh, but they're militarizing, we need to do that as well. So they're going to buy more as well, and you need to buy more again, and so on. So this is the paradox. What you need to do is look at, okay, how do we guarantee security on the European continent? And we'll get to that eventually. I think through
In
this
the
webinar.
discussion, yes.
But it's a very different mindset from the outset, actually, to see how you want to guarantee security rather than say we need more weapons.
Thank you very much, Mark. And you jumped already a question for me. So it was exactly what I wanted to ask. Aren't we already a military power? Because I think this is also a question that misses in press conference. I haven't heard a journalist actually asking that for a very long time, looking, into the parliament and different relevant press conferences. Because in fact, a big part of the European Union members are members of the NATO. For example, I come from Greece. Greece hasn't stopped following the NATO recommendations, actually overbeating the NATO recommendations in armament, even through the crisis. And I think there is also a kind of north-south subtle bias in it, especially because through these 2 years, we had also countries like Finland and Sweden that used to be neutral and now are officially members of the NATO. And this changed something. And I think the discourse is indeed taking place in 2 different political spheres in Europe, this Europe of 2 velocities. But nonetheless, aren't we already a military power? And I think you answered that already.
Did I? I'm not sure if I don't know if that is a question I would ask this way. What does it mean to be military power? The thing is, I agree with what you say. The question is not being asked, but when you ask the question, you also need to ask it in a context, because why do you want to be a military power? What does it mean to be military power? The United States are a military power, and they have the power to basically sustain 800 military bases or presence throughout the world, right? They're getting close, I'm guessing, to $1 trillion in defense spending. So it's massive amounts, and That is a military power, but is that something you want? Is that something you aspire to? Do we think that the European Union or Europe should become a power that can dominate the world? To an extent, this has been a concern from the beginning of European integration. When the French and the British got kicked out of the Suez Canal, when Nasser nationalized it and then they tried to invade it and whatever, they got kicked out. This was a concern and was one of the things that actually pushed them to go towards the European defense community, saying we cannot impose our will on the rest of the world militarily anymore like we used to do, with the good old times of colonialism. But do we think that today the Europe we want to build is a Europe that has the ability to impose its will on other countries? Or do we think, no, I mean, we need a defense, we don't want to abolish the army or not, whatever, but that should serve, I don't know, the protection of our citizens, or a security strategy that serves this. Because then you also have a discussion on what do we need? Do we need, I don't know, I think we now have 4 times more warships than Russia does. I think we have 3 times more artillery. We have 2 times more fighter jets. So you really need more fighter jets right now, and you want them to be bought in the United States, like the F-35s, or you want European ones? Don't we need more Canadairs? Those are like the firefighting planes, for the forest fires you have in Italy, in Spain, in Portugal, Greece, and so on every summer, basically. Don't you need that? Isn't that more important for security? So this entire reflection. So the question, are we a military power? Yes, I mean, to an extent, yes. Maybe not the European Union, but certain European countries definitely. Much stronger than many other countries in the world. And on the other hand, if you enter that discussion, you need to put the context and you need to put the objective very clearly.
Thank you, Marc. So let's pick it up from there. As you said, I mean, it is clear that security security as a word is per se a militarized word, no? Right now, when it is referred to, again, in press conferences by politicians, by EU officials, mainly it is let's say, a prerogative deriving from the presence of a threatening other, right? But within the left, of course, we have another discourse of security. We talk about the necessity to renew infrastructure, the necessity to mitigate, if not stop, climate change, a necessity of housing and all the social states that seem to be very far away in the past right now in Europe. So let me phrase this question this way. I mean, the ReARM Europe plan is, oh God, I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm thinking German for a moment there. Beziffert, so it's, there's supposed to be 800 billion that are going to be spent on that. Where does this money come from? And how would if this plan would actually be realized, how would it affect our everyday lives in Europe? What would that mean? And is it even possible to think of a plan like that without austerity, like we know it from the 2010 and onwards crisis?
No, I mean, the first thing I think when you look at those 800 billions, the first thing you need to say is that they've been lying to us. They've been lying to the people. They've been saying for over a decade now, there's no money. Basically for decades, if you go back to the Maastricht Treaty, of like, we need to bring back deficit, bring down public debt, and you need austerity. You need austerity in by privatizing public services. You need austerity by destroying hospitals, schools, whatever, pensions and so on. So the attacks on social rights in the name of austerity have been massive over the years, and justification throughout countries in Europe has always been there's no money. Now, this was always false. You could always go and get money, be it from a billionaire tax or whatever. But today you see that it can go very quickly if you want to mobilize money, right? So they want to mobilize 800 billion euros. Most of those will not actually be European money. It will be money that member states will be allowed to borrow on the market. So it will be an exception to the austerity rules. Many member states have already asked for such an exception, meaning we will accept that member states indebt themselves further if it is for military expenses, but not if it is for, schools. So this is obviously it's a very clear choice that you are making on the kind of country you wanna construct. It's very much a US model of people not being able to get healthcare, but the US having the strongest army in the world, And if you want to, if you want to survive and get good healthcare, you better become a soldier. That kind of philosophy. So it's not sure that this 800 billion will actually materialize. If it does, and I saw that the new German chancellor just said they want to be the most powerful army in the world, or in Europe probably. This is what might well happen, because Germany obviously having the ability to borrow more money on the financial markets because they have a higher or better credit rating than, for example, Italy would. This will also create or reinforce imbalances within Europe militarily. So you will have some countries that will be able to invest much more in their military sector than others. Aside from the fact that part of the money will come from European programs that exist now. I'm thinking of the cohesion funds. So funds that are supposed to help regions that are in a more difficult situation catch up, aside from if that works or not. But these funds will now be in part siphoned off towards the military industry. Hence, the social or territorial action of European funds will diminish, while the military action will increase, and this military action will then benefit mostly some member states. So there's also this internal equality in the European Union that is going to be reinforced.
What about the European weapon industry? Because I mean, there are countries in Europe that have quite strong export numbers. No, it was only last year, I think, that France actually surpassed Russia in weapon exports globally. It was 2024. And I've heard, at least I would not say the left spectrum, but the progressive spectrum, I've heard enough voices saying, well, this is a chance to revitalize our industrial policy, and we're just going to have publicly produced arms. What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, not all of these companies getting the money are public companies. Aside from any other considerations we might have on if we think it's a good thing to have more, how would I say, to have more weapons produced, but just to make sure it's not like it is a program, a military program that goes only to public companies. That's not true. Some of the companies that will benefit have partly public ownership or the state is an important shareholder in some of these companies. There's different aspects to this question. First, we need to clearly refuse the idea of how would I say, weapons exports as being I mean, the weapons export in a way kind of shows that this is not about our security or defense. Why? Because if you say we need weapons in Europe and then you basically sell them to other countries, then you really didn't need these weapons in Europe. Otherwise, you would not export them. So one of the points that would be the basis of any EU defense program should be the ban to export them. Like there should be a ban on exporting these weapons that have been funded and this is clearly not the case. And so yes, weapon exports of certain countries like Germany to Israel, for example, have massively increased. France is now amongst one of the main weapons arms exporters in the world. So you should refuse this. You should say, well, listen, you're saying you're selling this program to us, saying it's about our defense, our security, but you don't want to stop exporting these weapons. That's very weird. So this is one point. Secondly, obviously, these companies, let's be clear, these companies don't need our support. They don't need public support. They're not companies that are doing badly. Thanks to the war in Ukraine, thanks to the genocide in Gaza, these companies are making massive profits. Like this is like they're every time there's a war, just their ranking on the stock exchange massively increases. So they're doing very well. I mean, the defense sector is doing very well, very profitable sector. So they don't need help. It's not like we're helping companies in difficulties, and unfortunately, these companies, of course, will then lobby. Will say, we need more weapons. We need more production of weapons, and for security, it will never be enough. It'll never be enough. But let's also be clear: it's not a good thing for economy or industry, because like the so-called military Keynesianism. So the idea that you put public money in the military industry, and this will then pull up the rest of the economy. It doesn't hold up. It doesn't stand up to scrutiny. It's much more like if you want to relaunch your economy, you get much more for €1 invested in other industrial sectors than you get for something which is invested in the military industry. So economically, it's not a good strategy. Also because, I mean, this is something that, let me use a very simple image. But if you buy a car after 10, 15 years, you buy a new one because you drive it every day, and I mean, some cars go longer, others less, whatever. But if you buy a tank, unless you use it and you go to war, it will stand there for decades. So at some point, you create a labor force locked in the production of arms that you will hopefully never use unless you start a war. So there's a limit. I mean, once you have 1,000 tanks, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, at some point you have enough. So there's no, it's not a long-term strategy for a European industrial policy, rather on the contrary.
Thank you very much, Marc, also for this answer. Actually, I see that there is already a question in the Q&A box, which I will take up soon. And this is a call to everyone listening in. Use the Q&A box to ask Marc's questions. We are now half an hour in the webinar. In about 20 minutes, I will start picking up, or 15 minutes, the questions from the Q&A box. Thanks. So we talked about that. Now, there is a campaign. Also, Transform is one of the initiators of this campaign called Stop ReARM Europe. PDB, I think, signed it also recently. It seems to be a big topic of discussion in European social movements, workers' movements, but also in anti-racist movements. A lot of people are alarmed. Do you think it makes sense to fight this, to fight Stop ReARM? And since we know that the general feeling in Europe is that European politics, I mean, you are in Brussels and you're Belgian, but for everybody else in the European Union, Brussels seems very far away. So is this something that makes sense to fight in our own countries? I guess so, but maybe you want to give your take on this.
Well, yes, first of all, it's not because we live in Brussels that Europe is close by. Europe, the European institutions are very much not part of our city. Like they're very closed, and it's not like they're open and everyone walks in and walks out and understands perfectly what happens in the European Union. Like it's very much of a EU bubble in Brussels, let's put it that way. So of course it makes sense because it's going to have massive impact on our lives. Like you cannot, as I said before, like they say that we need cuts everywhere except here. While we need to fight climate change, there's so many other like challenges, and then they say, yeah, but defense is vital. What do you mean an ambulance is not vital? Like you think you can live without emergency services, without direct access to hospitals, to primary healthcare, to decent education? That is vital to our lives. Firefighting is vital to our lives. And I hear sometimes like the Social Democrats and the Greens supporting these programs in many countries, and they say, yeah, we need this, but we also need the same money for I don't know, public services or whatever, or the climate. But that's not going to happen. That money is not going to. There's not going to be like another 800 billion. No, this is money that, as I said, with the cohesion funds, this is money that's going to be taken away from us and given to the military industry. Which then will, to a large extent, give it also to the shareholders, because we've seen this. Like we even did it with the pharmaceutical industry. We gave them more money than they actually spent in the research of the vaccines, for example. Like it's amazing, and so there's a big risk. There's been done research recently on this, that this money that we'll give them will also go in big part to the shareholders. So yes, it makes sense because it's about the kind of society we want to construct, we want to build. What do we want to have? Do we want to have a US model, over militarized and so on, or do we want to say no? We want a different way. We want, we don't want to follow the US model of I don't know, militarism, living, whatever it is,
Yeah. Let me ask you another question. I'm very curious myself. Do you think, I mean, for example, now you're a member in many committees, you're a member of the European Parliament, but do you think actually in the decisions that are made around defense now, the European Parliament democratically plays the role it should play? Do you feel sidelined? I mean, there are different articles like in Politico, but also in other outlets saying that it seems that everything is being done, so the discussions, the important ones, are not taking place into the parliament, but in some minister councils. How do you perceive the debate around ReARM Europe now?
Well, there's very little debate. Like globally, like I gave one of the criticisms I gave was very, I would say, a very basic one on accountancy, right?
Mhm.
Um, Even this debate in the European Parliament is almost absent. Like it almost looks like you're in a, I don't know, cheering on a football team. It's like, yeah, go, 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 rather than asking questions that you would ask in any. And then it's always urgent. It's always so on all of these military programs. We have had ASAP on munition production, EDIRPA on joint purchasing. We now have EDIP on defense industrial program. Anyway, we have a number of these programs that are not ReARM Europe, but are all in the same direction. Now, on ReARM Europe and on part of it, unjustly, the European Parliament has even been cut out. And then, hence, this is being contested, and thankfully, that's very good. But unfortunately, even within Parliament, the big groups are just running behind this. Like it's very, the concept of militarization. But this has always been the case. In the case of let's say chauvinism and how wonderful Europe is compared to the world and whatever. There's always been these tendencies to get this big unity towards war. Well, in wartime, this is like you need to unite behind Europe or behind your country, and so even basic questions that we would ask are not being asked. The European Commission proposes to open up a number of programs to the European Social Fund, Horizon program, which is a research and development program, to military applications. This is new, but the European Commission does not come with an impact assessment. Like normally they're forced to do an impact assessment. Now they do not even assess the impact of what this is going to mean, because it's so-called urgent, but they've been preparing this for a long time, so it's not urgent at all. But all of these dynamics basically show that it will not come from inside institutions. Of course, we will bring a voice of peace inside Parliament, and we will bring out a number. We will continue to bring out a number of criticisms we have of this program, but it will not primarily be put on the agenda from within the institutions. If we manage to organize resistance, mobilizations, critical analysis, critical voices for peace, against militarization at national or European levels, but outside the institutions, this will be critical. This is how certain countries have better positions on Gaza than others. If there's a strong solidarity movement, it makes a difference. If the same thing with the climate, thanks to the mobilization, it was put on the agenda of the European institutions or member states. So this thing of articulating pressure on the institutions is absolutely going to be crucial if we want to avoid going in the direction they want to push us in.
Super. Thank you very much, Marc. I mean, now there are already 4 questions in the chat. I would propose that I start reading them out, and then we continue the discussion as it goes. I wanted you also to mention the group of personalities advising the EU on defense issues, because a lot of people don't even know that it exists or that the weapon industry is literally sitting there. But maybe we do that later. So there is a first question by Marika Frakakis, is a comrade from Greece, asking the following: the rate of military expenditure in relation to GDP is higher in the Baltics and in Greece by comparison to other European countries. And she's asking, is this, she says, this is linked to the perceived danger from Russia or Turkey, respectively? How could we change that? How to change that feeling of insecurity that justifies, so to say, this kind of expenditure? That's one question. And maybe I read a second one. Is it okay?
Yes.
Yeah, there is a second question from an anonymous writer asking, is it possible that Putin provoked the war so the weapon industry can make big profits? I could ask the same question with the US as well. So is it possible that the weapon industry's profits are, so to say, the center of this development? These are the 2 questions now.
On the first question, no, obviously it's your threat perception will be different according to the geographical or geopolitical environment you're in. That's very clear. Now, how to change it? I think the only way to change this is to, first of all, there's in these countries a lot of people that want peace, in all countries, and so we shouldn't always just listen to the leaders or the dominant tendencies, because like we as well, when we look at the Baltic states, sometimes we get the impression, oh, everyone's in favor of war, and in reality, if you speak to the people, it's not the case. In Russia as well, there's a lot of people that want this war to end, that didn't want this war to happen, and so on. So against their regimes. So I think it's a difficult discourse. It's not easy, because the way they scare people, that this is a tradition, let's say, of propaganda. It's like you make people scared, so they will accept anything, like limiting democratic rights, civil liberties, and so on. I think the first reaction to this internationally, like not internationally, but like in foreign policy wise, is to say, listen, we have lessons from the Cold War. The Cold War was a standoff between two blocks that were obviously, close to each other, next to each other. And at some point, we saw that military buildup did not create peace. It does not create peace. What creates peace is talks, is finding a common way of organizing security, collective security, like the United Nations say. And this was the entire philosophy of the Helsinki process at the time. Now, what was possible at the time with a much stronger Soviet Union than Russia is now, should be possible today. So, you had a lot of armaments control, transparency initiatives, and so on, respecting the fact that they were two very different systems. So not saying we want to take over, we want to enlarge our sphere of influence, and so on, saying, okay, this is the way it is, and we need to find a way of coexisting peacefully. So I think that's something. Secondly, of course, there's also the guts. I mean, you can speak to the what was it, the heart and the minds, as someone called it. So you can speak to the mind, but also to the heart, to the guts, of saying, listen, we can, together mobilize, and find these exchanges with people fighting for peace in the different countries. Having this solidarity with people from different countries, it changes your perception of the other country. If you only see the warmongering politician from your country or from another country, obviously your perception is going to be very different. So we need to work on this perception. And thirdly, we need to work on the interests. Like the interests of the working classes of our continent are different. We don't have an interest in eternal war. We don't, in these standoffs. Some might, but we do not. We have an interest in constructing peace with the different neighbors, be it in the south, be it in the east, wherever you live, and then see how we can bring this across and say, listen, do you want to have eternal war with more fighter jets and so on, or do you want to invest more in I don't know, in hospitals, whatever. But I acknowledge it's a much more difficult position to have if you look at it from I don't know, from Lithuania, than if you look at it from Portugal, or a very different discussion at least. I disagree, for example, that you can only be threatened or feel threatened if you're in Lithuania. You can make people in Belgium, the risk would be different, but like a nuclear strike would not be excluded. So this is a debate you need to have about what security, how you do it. But so my idea would be to speak to the mind by saying, listen, an alternative is possible. Diplomacy, negotiations can bring peace, can bring security guarantees to all of us, much more than any militarization. And on the other hand, to say, hey, but speak to the heart, to the guts, by saying this is going to cost us a lot. This is going to cost us a lot in human security. We're going to be afraid for the rest of our lives. Our children might grow up in a war zone. Do we want that? No. So how are we going to avoid that? And so link these two. I hope that kind of, there's no miracle solution, unfortunately, but I hope that kind of replies to your question. To the second question, I don't think so. I don't think it's all about the arms industry. I mean, the arms industry is obviously a powerful lobby, pushing for militarization, pushing, and benefiting from war. There's no question about that. But I think in this case, some geopolitical considerations were more important. I think the decision from Putin to invade Ukraine had to do with geopolitics, the desire to control part of it, to control the immediate southern neighborhood of Russia. If not to occupy it, then at least to have to make clear that it would be not a member of NATO, and that it would be potentially loyal to Russia and so on. So I think there were geopolitical considerations in this, rather than just the lobby of the arms industry. So yeah.
Thank you, Mark. I mean, I talked because you mentioned also the Cold War, the situation with the two different, fundamentally different, also ideological blocks. There was the non-aligned movement at some point at that time as well. That was quite important. Also, the neutrality as a concept that prevailed in many countries after the Second World War. And it seems that we kind of lose grip on this, but it's also, I can understand people being very, very confused. I mean, 2016, after Brexit, and the first time that Trump won the election, the buzzword in the European Parliament was autonomy, strategic autonomy, European autonomy. Then Biden won the next election, then there was no autonomy anymore. There were a lot of common NATO, EU meetings and strategy papers and plans and expenditure. Now after the second, like I say, well inside the second Trump term, European autonomy is not really the buzzword that it was 2016, but you still have people, I will say again, not in the left, but in the broad progressive spectrum of politics, so excluding now the conservatives and the far right, arguing that another reason for a strong European army, PESCO operativity is the fact that Europe should be independent from the US. So how do you counter that argument would be my question. And then there is a couple of questions more in the chat. After this one, I'll take them one by one.
Right. No, I think there's, first of all, it's important to say that nothing in the current program guarantees European autonomy. Huh? I mean, it's all compatible with NATO, a lot of US weapons again, so the F-35s are going to be bought by a number of countries. So there's no real intention to go towards EU autonomy or to guarantee it in these programs. Some say yes, but we will create a situation in which we then can break free. But for the moment, this is not. It's clearly not part of the texts that are on the table. Secondly, I think there's three ways Europe can go right now. One way is staying the lapdog of the United States. We've been for decades now. And increasing this dependency. They're celebrating the fact that we broke free from Russian gas, supposedly, because that's not entirely true. But anyway, but in turn, we increased our gas imports from the United States, becoming more dependent on the United States with high prices, very polluting gas, shale gas, fracking, and so that's not. It's clearly deepening our dependency on the United States. The same thing now with the reaction to Trump's tariffs war, where the European Union, European Commission proposed to maybe we can import more soybeans from Europe, so you'll be nicer to us, or we can cut more ties with China. Cutting more ties with China means you will become more dependent on the United States. We've seen this in the chips industry, the semiconductor industry, very strategic industry, where the United States put pressure on EU companies to cut ties with China. So I think this is one way we can go, but it's not the best way we can go. Another way we can go is more of an autonomous Europe, but still a militarized Europe. But we're going to buy massive weapons or produce made in Europe, more made in Europe, a little bit what I was alluding to before. Same model as the United States, but then European, so we'll be able to bomb Libya by ourselves, to invade other countries more autonomously, basically. EU imperialism, EU militarism, but autonomously. So that is a different tendency. But I think we need a third way. It sounds bad, obviously, for those that know the history of Tony Blair and company. But I mean a third way in a way of, with the emergence of new countries, the BRICS now surpassing the traditional industrial G7, GDP-wise, economy-wise. this offers potential to say we're going to diversify our trade relations, create more relations with China, more relations with India, with Brazil, with South Africa, with Indonesia, with whatever, creating a real autonomy that we can then, but that's, requires a change of economy, of course, so that we can put this at the heart of developing, Europe. Europe has I don't know, technology-wise, we're backward right now. Huh? Let's be very clear. Europe is not I don't know, the EU propaganda and the mindset still very much we lead the world, but in reality, no. You go to Asia, the center of the economy is over there. The infrastructure is better there. Like they've got trains running on time, faster than ours, and so on and so on. Like we're very quickly becoming, at certain levels, a developing continent. So I think that's the way you need to go, with massive public investment, diversifying trade relations, and saying, we're going to look at defense and security, not defense and security, in a very holistic way, and say, okay, what do we need to guarantee security and peace on our continent? And there's going to be something that we will take back from the Helsinki process. Invest in peace. I always give this example. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Its annual budget is lower than the cost of an F-22 Raptor fighter jet. So it means that if you buy one of those F-22s, you have invested more in war than you invest in peace through the OSCE. So and this is the way I think we need to go with the new security architecture on the European continent. That's not weird. It's been on the agenda. It was on the agenda during the Cold War. It can be back on the agenda right now.
Thank you very much, Marc. So I'm going to jump back in the Q&A box, reading out loud again. Somebody from Greece, a comrade from Greece. What is the main obstacle to have an international anti-war movement? And that is against massive defense spending, in your opinion. So what do you think? How can we, to formulate it positively, how can we strengthen the anti-war movement? I mean, it's a big question, because those of us that are around 40 years old, maybe just a little bit younger and for sure older, remember the resistance, for example, to the Iraq War, all the political process that was unleashed after that. And it's a matter of fact that with the exception of some countries like Italy, where they have managed to massively mobilize against the war and also against ReARM now, we don't see it happening. So what do you think? What can we do to strengthen the anti-war movement?
Well, I'm guessing I'm speaking for Transform. I'm speaking to an audience that's very much committed politically itself, and the question is, like, do we speak up? Do we show the inconsistencies in their programs and their rhetoric? I always give this example, right? Because it struck me in Parliament on diplomacy regarding the ending of the Ukraine war. Because now European Union hasn't taken one initiative to end the Ukraine war through diplomacy, right? We put a lot of proposals. I put I think one amendment per plenary resolution to say, let's also do diplomacy. And it was refused every single time. And the argument was always interesting. When the Russians were winning, let's say, were occupying ever more terrain in Ukraine, they were saying, but we can't negotiate now because you need to negotiate from a position of strength. So let's wait until we are in a position of strength. And then at some point, the Ukrainians were actually liberating part of their territory militarily. And then so we came back with a proposal, let's negotiate now. And it was like, no, we can't negotiate now. We're going to free it militarily, Ukraine, even though the US Army chief said that was not going to happen or was very unlikely to happen and so on. But so there was never a time for diplomacy. They always had the argument, like when you were winning, it was like, no, we're winning. When you were losing, no, we need to win first. So, but we need to unmask these, how would I say, these inconsistencies. And we need to say, listen, diplomacy is always going to happen. Negotiations are going to happen. The question is, are we going to play part in this or not? We need to, once again, to play, to also be very clear, to answer the arguments they put out there, and not to be afraid. Like they pretend to know, but they don't know. They don't know either. Like they're just like, we need European autonomy. Let's buy F-35 fighter jets. That's not coherent at all. Yes, you need to accept that if you get a heart attack, it will take you longer to get to the hospital, right? Or you will wait endlessly in a corridor in a hospital, like it's the case in France and in other countries. You need to accept that. No, we don't need to accept that. You find 800 billion for war, Where's my 800 billion for my hospital? These kinds of things, and they're very visual, very concrete, but we need to go out there and talk to people, and give them the numbers. Let the other ones explain why you cannot defend yourself with a budget that's 3 times higher. Why can you not? Why do you need 2 times more fighter jets than the Russian? Why even with 2 times more fighter jets can you not defend yourself? Explain that. What's wrong? Why are you incompetent, or are you lying? And dare to go on the offensive as well. Like, it's not, we are on the right side of history. This doesn't mean it's easy. But I think we have arguments.
Thank you very much, Marc. On arguments, by the way, yes, sign up to the Transform newsletter so you don't miss webinars like this, where you get arguments to fight your everyday political fights. Let's continue with a question by Maurizio Coppola from the IBA. He's asking another question of questions. You didn't mention NATO. We did, Maurizio, but anyway, but nonetheless, he's saying, and he's right, the ReARM Europe documents, and also I think he refers to the strategy paper as well, on defense, mentions NATO multiple times. And how can Europe be a social Europe while still having members that are part of NATO? And shouldn't stop ReARM also mean exiting NATO or dismantling NATO? That's a question for you. I don't know, you want to take this question and then I'll go on.
But I think NATO is very interesting, because indeed the presence, and we said it before, right? When I said that, for example, also these documents do not foresee an European autonomy in the real sense of the word. NATO is incompatible with European autonomy. So aside from the fact that NATO is now an offensive organization, our government still call it defensive, saying no, but it's only there for defense. But in reality, since it started doing out of zone operations, it basically became an offensive, like an organization that's on also for attacking rather than defending. But aside from the nature of NATO is incompatible with European autonomy. Why? Because NATO imposes complementarity and compatibility with US weapon systems, meaning hence that you cannot develop an autonomous EU defense, aside from the discussion what kind of form and shape such a thing would have to take, but within NATO. So that is very, very clear. Now, the interesting part is that for all of the criticism of the United States, there's no real desire today inside the European Union, of the European members, the countries, European Union, member states of the European Union that are also members of NATO, will make it, to really question that. It pops up in the documents, you said it, but it also, even when we discussed the white paper on European defense, the Commission didn't really see the need for a European needs assessment on defense and security. They were like, no, NATO has one. So this is true, and indeed it requires a reflection on NATO. It requires also an alternative on NATO. I mean, this is also this idea of the only security orders possible is this NATO alliance. Why? I mentioned the OSCE, the Helsinki process. These are other things than NATO. And so you can organize collective defense or collective security in a different way than through NATO. And maybe the thing would be to say, listen, we need, and today more than ever, I think there's a window of opportunity to say this, that NATO will not guarantee, NATO is not there to protect Europe. NATO is there to protect the interests, and very often, what's the phrase? The United States, they don't have allies, they have, interests. And today it's very clear, is NATO going to defend Greenland when the United States invade? No, it's not. Will NATO force us to join the United States in an invasion of Panama? Potentially. So that these are good arguments to say, listen, we don't want NATO anymore, and there are alternatives. And I think it's important to put these alternatives on the map as well, because NATO says, but we guarantee security and defense to Belgium. Belgium is a small country; it cannot go by alone, so we protect it, right? And now you can say rationally that's not true. We know that NATO does something different, and that's true. And there's enough analysis on the left of what NATO really is. But I think it's very strong if you add to that, listen, there's an alternative. We can do this differently. NATO is not the only way of guaranteeing, or it's not a way, first of all, of guaranteeing security, but secondly, it's also not the only cooperation possible.
Thanks, Mark. I'm going to take two questions at the same time because I think the first one, more or less, you answered. I'm reading out loud. Emily is asking, politically and strategy-wise, how could we use this ReARM project to push as an opportunity to bring the climate and peace movement together to support our common objectives? So Emily's basically saying, yeah, we have had a very strong climate justice movement in Europe. How can we bring them together with the peace movement? And maybe I think it is also relevant to this. There's the last question asking about the energy market and saying, do you think that it will be possible for the EU to achieve more independence in the energy market or in its relation to China without its own military industry and defense?
Okay, these are two very different questions. So let me start with the former one. It's a difficult one. I mean, I think people mobilize for there's also a very strong Palestinian movement, a pro anti-genocide movement, let's say, pro basic human rights. And these are linked because and I think one of the positive sides of all of this is indeed that you can see how there are links. Obviously, climate policy is impossible if you militarize your economy. War is bad for the climate. I mean, it sounds stupid to say, but it's so very true, and we need to highlight it. And even if there's no war, the fact all of the money that you're going to put there, you're not going to put into other things. So you're not going to put it into, Palestine's another example. Obviously, these weapons, they're also going to Israel. Like, this is the ridiculous part of it. Positive side of it, like the idea that the European Union is based on human rights and international law. It's really been, no country in the global south, I think, still believes it. So it's really impressive if you see the attitude towards Europeans after the start of the Gaza genocide. It's really changed. Like it's weakened EU diplomacy a lot. I gave some examples earlier. So I think we need to, break down the different parts of this militarization aspect. And some people will be more sensitive to certain aspects of it. The social aspect, for example, the fact that in Germany, they're doing this now, certain sectors are getting a label of strategic, and then the working rights or the right to strike and stuff are limited. This is a social argument to make. We don't want to be, we don't want forced labor, quote unquote, for weapons. Some people will be more sensitive to the climate argument. All people, I think, should be sensitive to the peace argument. So it's really going out there, federating, talking to people, trade unions that can mobilize, Greenpeace, I don't know, other organizations, they all have a take on these issues. And of course, we need dialogue, we need to work together, but in the end, they can come together. So it of course depends also on your national reality. Like, we all have different ways in different countries how these movements and these organizations relate and work. This is why I cannot say like this is the way to do it, but it can happen. But we have arguments on people that are specifically interested in climate, but many of these people are also interested in peace. Like, there's you can make the point to them that militarization is bad for the climate. True, very, very true. But it's not like the young people that mobilize for the climate are like, but I don't care about peace. That's also not necessarily the case. But there's arguments both sides. There's arguments on the one hand to say, hey, this is also bad for the climate. Great, let's talk about it. And then there's arguments to say, hey, but you also care about peace. So, I've seen at peace demonstrations, I've seen people from all of these movements. It's not. And then the second question, and this is a sign that I talked too much. I kind of forgot. Help me.
Okay, and don't worry. So the question was whether European autonomy, for example, in the energy sector,
No.
or any positive side of European autonomy, I would translate it, is possible without having the sufficient defense and military budget. That
Sure.
was the question.
I mean, first of all, what is no, nothing is possible without sufficient budget. The question is, what is sufficient budget? Why do you need much more money than India to be independent? So India can be independent with a budget that's much lower than ours, but we cannot, or South Africa, or whatever. So this is the first thing. What is sufficient? Energy-wise, of course, there's a diversification of sources, which is important. The massive investment in renewables is the best guarantee to get some autonomy. Because cutting off Russian gas has not made us more independent, made us more independent of Russia, perhaps. But then we're importing more from Azerbaijan. We are importing more soon from Israel as well, who's stealing the gas from the Palestinians, more from Qatar, and so on and so on. So more from the United States, as we've discussed before. Now, diversification as such is good, but the best thing is to have a massive investment, public investment in a public energy sector to guarantee low prices, renewable energy. That can guarantee independence, or not independence, but autonomy. Like independence, it can be interdependency is also very good. Now, if the question is we need enough to scare all other people into obeying us, I don't think that's the way we should go. Because it creates a very ugly world. It creates a world that is not in line with the principles of the UN Charter, which say that you should respect each other as each other's interests and so on. And it creates a world in which we will, in the end, all lose, because it creates a world in which you think, well, with my military power, I should dictate you what to do, but then others are going to want to dictate us what to do. So yes, you need sufficient budget for everything. But in this case, sufficient budget means sufficient budget to guarantee your security and defensive defense needs. And as I said, I still haven't seen an argument to say that we need to massively increase our expenditure on defense. For example, the Belgian defense budget doubled over the last years. I don't know exactly. I think 7 years, more or less. And still, it's said that Belgium would not be able to, defend itself for more than a couple of days, or a couple of weeks, whatever it might be. Okay, so where's the money gone? Once again, voilà.
Yes, and it's also the human factor, as you correctly said before. When they discuss about buying procurement, buying more weapons, buying new systems, they never say where they're going to find the soldiers that would actually later operate the systems. And I think a very worrying development is also how militarization is entering, as we speak, schools and universities. This is really, 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 really scary, and everyday life. Now, coming back to the questions by our audience, there is another question. Is it really a long-term economic benefit, the militarization of Europe, or the acceleration of Europe's militarization, or is it a prelude to a war we can't stop against Russia? So, should we really be scared? Is really war in the agenda? Because it really seems so. I understand the question by the comrade asking it. And yeah, the next questions are about big tech and authoritarianism, but let's do that afterwards.
Well, yes, I think there's the idea of buying weapons and stuff is with the perspective of war. Economically, it's not a very interesting investment to make. You're not going to relaunch the European economy with the military industry. For the reasons I explained before. There's a lot of literature out there as well on why military Keynesianism is a fallacy. It doesn't work for many reasons. I gave some examples earlier. So yeah, the idea is a war. Is it war against Russia? Is it war against someone else? That's a different discussion, different debate. But these weapons are being bought for not for fun, not just for, hey, we need weapons or we need to please someone. If you have this military buildup, it's not a coincidence that the United States have attacked so many countries. They have the military budget to use it. So yes, this is. I'm afraid that that's more the case. And really, on military Keynesianism, there's a lot of literature out there to say that it makes no sense at all.
Thank you, Mark. And then there is a question about the involvement of big tech companies and new technologies in the militarization of the European Union. Do they play a role on this part of the Atlantic? Because we sure know that they do on the other part of the Atlantic. And yeah, let's start with this, and then authoritarianism and nationalism would be the second part of the question. And this is just, sorry, to our audience, this is your last chance to pose a question. We're going to stay here around 20 minutes more. We want to release Marc to his important political work afterwards. Thanks.
Well, maybe I'll just go out and have a drink as well, if that.
Also, you're allowed to do that.
Let's see. But no, more seriously, the question of big tech plays a big part, of course, but it plays. Okay, first of all, big tech is US tech. Let's be very clear about this. The EU has massive, I said it before, delays in all of these sectors. We're completely dependent from mainly US multinationals. For the cloud, for example, fundamental to any independence. So you speak about EU autonomy. Without its own digital, and I would argue public infrastructure, you will not have any autonomy, because your data will always go through clouds and other, how would I say, other infrastructure owned by companies like the US giants. So this is fundamental. It's really, really fundamental, because technology, of course, and increasingly so in the wars to come, will be defining if you win or not. If you're able to defend yourself or not against not just cyber attacks, but anything. And so here as well, one of the things I would say is, like, rather than these 800 billion to buy weapons, let's put money into a digital and public infrastructure, so that Europe can have its own cloud. Let's rather than import these NVIDIA processors and copy the US model for AI, let's look at what the Chinese have done differently. Why are the Chinese able to, get DeepSeek out this quickly, and basically leading in a number of high-tech sectors right now compared to the United States? What have they done right? Like, how come we, as Europe, that the European Union came in beginning of the 2000s with the Lisbon strategy, and the Lisbon strategy had this formula of saying that Europe should be the most competitive and most dynamic knowledge-based economy in the world in a few years after that. Now, that clearly didn't happen. On the contrary. And so we need to find out, there's a lot of strengths, a lot of research, a lot of good companies and stuff in Europe that are doing amazing work, but why have we fallen behind? And that is obviously because the European Union has had a strategy that's been, submitting to the United States partially, but also refusing to take public initiative in all of these sectors. And if you leave it to the market, it's not going to work. You're not going to have it. Forget about it. And so we can learn from other countries. We've been looking a lot at the US model. Let's see what the Chinese have done differently to catch up their technological delays. And I know it's a little bit of a revolution. The idea of maybe Europeans can learn something from southern countries, but yes, let's get out of that colonial arrogance.
Thank you very much, Marc, also for the last comment. So there are now another two questions, okay? One, will the militarization increase authoritarianism and nationalism further? I would argue that they go hand in hand, but maybe you see it in a different way. Yeah, what do you think about that, authoritarianism and militarization? And then Carmen corrected her question. I'm sorry, Carmen, if I didn't read you right before. Can you give us a picture of the European Parliament in the ReARM debate, if there is any? Is an emerging coalition of members against it? So who is against the ReARM Europe plan in the European Parliament would be the second question. But let's start with the first one, the political one.
The political one.
Authoritarianism,
No.
nationalism.
I don't know. I'm aging, but my memory is not that bad yet. No. Let me. Is there? Yes. The short answer is yes. Historically, this has been the case. Um, you can see it in different countries over the last years that, for example, the right to protest has been limited. You see it in Germany a lot against the Palestinian protests. In Belgium, the new government's put on the agenda again a new law to put is putting put in the governmental declaration to basically put a new law to limit the right to protest as well, to criminalize some protesters. I know in Italy there's been some initiatives in that direction, or a new law voted recently. So yes, they go hand in hand. They go hand in hand because you want to militarize the minds, but the people that resist also need to be,
Disciplined.
disciplined. Indeed, that's the right word. So there is a very concerning anti-democratic tendency, of course, that goes together with militarization. And this is why the fight for democratic rights is also so important. The fight for democratic debate, to be able to say no, ReARM Europe is bad. To be able to say, and you've seen it a little bit also on Ukraine. Like if you said, but maybe we need diplomacy too, they were like, you're pro-Putin. And like, what?
Yeah.
And this was a ridiculous accusation, especially against the left. It was like, I mean, we were against Putin when he was destroying Chechnya, while all European leaders, Tony Blair, our prime ministers and stuff, they still went to Moscow, have coffee, go to the opera with Vladimir Putin. So it was ridiculous. At the same time, it's a way to stifle the debate. It's a way of saying, you want to negotiate when we are winning. This is because you don't want us to win. You want to negotiate while they are winning. This is when you want them to win. So it's a completely how would I say? It's a way of making the other one look like illegitimate, decredibilizing his arguments or her arguments. And so I think the struggle for democratic rights, for democratic debate, is extremely important. And I'm sure that in all of your countries, I don't know where you're all from, but in all of your countries, these questions are on the agenda right now.
Thank you, Marc. I think it was a very good example as well that you put there. So now the second question.
The members.
The members, yeah. Do you
Well,
think something moving in the parliament, or is it the left? Are you isolated, or is there something moving in there?
Well, there's debates also within the left. It's not like, but there's always been debates. I got this question yesterday. I did an interview yesterday, and they asked me like, so what's wrong with the EU? It was the US interview. What's wrong with the EU left? Why are they not mobilizing more for peace or on Palestine and so on? And I replied that obviously the left or the progressive forces are very different. Like the Social Democrats and the Greens, like the German Greens, I think they initially come from a peace movement, and they're now the most militaristic. Like they're worse than certain more center-right parties in how many weapons they want to send and how many. So it's a debate also within the left and within progressive parties. It's always been a case. Like the First World War, the entire history on how social democrats went into social chauvinism. Okay, I wasn't born either, and I guess most of you none of you listening were born. But these are parts. The same thing with the anti-colonial struggle, like the Algerian liberation struggle. It was not supported wholeheartedly at all, to be kind to them, by the Social Democrats. So this struggle within the parliament, within even progressive parties, is not an easy one. But we need to put it on the agenda, and so the left plays a fundamental role in that. Some other parties that are not part of our parliamentary group have put it on the agenda. And we, I'm not, my main objective is not to convince people here in parliament. Let me be honest. I think if we want to change things in parliament, it's by creating, how would I say, public opinion, by getting influence from the people, by putting that on the agenda. I gave the example of the demonstration for Palestine in Belgium that pushes the government, puts it under pressure. And I think we need that here as well. I don't think we need to look at parliament and say, okay, with the best arguments, I can convince someone. one or two MEPs, members of the European Parliament, can be swayed perhaps to say yes, peace. This goes too far and whatever. And we need the right arguments, all of that. But I think the main energy and the main focus we need to have is to say, okay, how can we create a pro-peace consensus? Because this determines how governments will speak and act. The fact that in Italy, the Pope, the previous Pope, and a massive feeling amongst the population in favor of peace has impact. It's not a detail. The fact that in Ireland there's a very strong feeling, popular feeling of solidarity with Palestine, it makes that even more right-wing parties from Ireland have to say things that their European equivalents would not say. So articulating this pressure should really be our priority.
Thank you very much, Mark. I have no other questions in the Q&A, and I think, to be honest, we covered a lot of the topics we wanted to discuss. Maybe, I mean, we talked about Stop ReARM. Maybe I use the floor also to say that there is a week of action planned starting from the 21st of June to the 29th of June, and there is going to be the anti-NATO summit in The Hague. There's going to be a demonstration there. From what I know, there's going to be a big national demonstration against ReARM in Rome, at least, and I think something is on the pipeline in Spain. So everybody stay tuned and keep up the good fight. Also you, Mark. And maybe we meet in some months and you tell us, give us a little bit more insights also on how the struggle is going on into the parliament. And I give you the floor for some last words to peace-loving people listening to us today afternoon to close.
No, thank you, Adam. I'm not going to say much more. I think we've covered a lot of ground. And no, I think it's the positive thing is that there's optimism. Because we need to stop looking at ourselves as the losing side. We are not. We can win, and we need to win this. We have won battles in the past. No one thought that we were going to be able to, that the Vietnam War was going to be able to be stopped. And of course, the resistance. I'm speaking about that because it's 50 years this year. The climate movement, the massive movement of boycotting apartheid in South Africa. All of these movements have had an impact that potentially people starting the movement did not expect. So the time is done for like complaining about how how we're not having the impact we would like to have, and to move. And I'm sure everyone in listening today or watching today, I don't know, is convinced of that. And this spirit of optimism can really can move mountains, as someone would say.
I agree, thank you. And to give you some optimism, because you asked about the countries, we had people from Greece, from Denmark, from Belgium, from the Netherlands, from France, from Italy, from Austria. I think I saw somebody from Finland as well. There are more than 10 countries out there, and Turkey.
Very nice.
So it was a good meeting you, and thank you for taking the time again. Talk
Thank
to you
you very much
soon.
to all of you.
See you in the barricades. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Tatiana, for helping as well. Bye. Hi, Tati. There's still people here. I'll stop the recording.